Hello everyone, this is Kestraptorial. So, it is February 2nd, which is commonly celebrated in America and Canada as Groundhog Day. Apparently spun out of a Pennsylvanian Dutch superstition that the groundhog is an animal that can forecast the weather, more specifically the coming of an early spring. Now, it's really celebrated as little more than just for fun, mostly. Although the sub-zero temperatures that we had been experiencing this past week due to the polar vortex storm has coincidentally broken this day. The temperature has been 30 degrees warmer today than previous this week, which is quite the rise. However, where I live in Northeast Ohio, it's actually quite common for winter temperatures to fluctuate between bitter cold and almost spring-like weather, waxing and waning several times until the actual start of spring, which in Northeast Ohio doesn't really consistently, the warmer weather doesn't stick around until the beginning of May, really, at least consistently. Now, Groundhog Day is also the title of a 1993 comedy film starring Bill Murray, who plays a character named Phil Collins, a weather reporter who is sent to cover the Groundhog Day celebration in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania. That is, in fact, where the main festival takes place. And yes, the groundhog in real life is given the name Punxsutawney Phil. If you haven't seen the movie, it gave the name to the trope. It was the trope neighbor of the Groundhog Day Loop, which means a situation in which a character or characters are stuck in a cycle of reliving the same day over and over again until some needed goal is achieved. And often this means learning to make the most out of the day or whatever time period is being repeated according to the story. So symbolic for making the most out of life in the right way. This is exactly what happens in the Groundhog Day film, where the only character that goes through this endless cycle of reliving the titular Groundhog Day is Phil himself. Not the groundhog, the Bill Murray's character, though maybe the groundhog does too. They never do say whether the groundhog is the cause of it all. And actually, that would be interesting if the groundhog did it in that movie. Anyway, so the movie was actually one of my dad's favorite films in the time period when I was a child and teenager. I think his favorite movie since the millennium began has been Galaxy Quest, though Groundhog Day would still be a close second. Galaxy Quest is awesome, by the way. But Groundhog Day is a good movie, although I should probably give you the heads up that if you haven't seen it before and are going to watch it, or maybe you are watching it tonight, it is going to feel very tedious the first time. It's going to feel like it really drags. It's going to seem a lot longer than it actually is, more so even than most movies. A lot of movies seem longer than they are. The first time you see them, this one even more so. There are other stories that have used the Groundhog Day Loop plot since this movie. This movie was the trope namer. Although other stories don't focus on Groundhog Day itself. It's some other day or time period that repeats, and probably my favorite series that does this is an infamous horror mystery anime known as Higurashi no Naku Koro ni, or When They Cry. It's the first in the When They Cry series. It was followed by Umineko, which is extraordinarily complex. And I don't even know if you can even get the Umineko episodes anymore. They actually weren't that well executed, really, from the visual novels. It's much better if you're interested in Umineko. to just get the visual novels. With Higurashi, the anime series is actually very good. So Higurashi is the story of, I think, a 15-year-old boy named Keiichi Maibara, who moves to a small village, Hinamizawa, that is based off of the real-life Shirakawa-go village in Japan. Now, at the one classroom school, yeah, the village is that small, he meets these 4 girls, Mion and Rena, who are close to his age, and the younger girls, I think they're about 10 or 11, Satoko and Rika, who formed this very weird game club together with these weird rules and punishment games. You really need to watch the series yourself if you can find it. I can't describe it in a way that would give it justice. Even describing it, giving spoilers, I don't think I could adequately explain it. Even if I gave spoilers, if you can find the series, you should watch it yourself. I know that Hulu used to have the first season. I'm not sure if it still does. I've been trying to find out if Crunchyroll has it and some other sites. It doesn't look very promising. I don't know why it's so hard to get. It was amazingly well received, despite being very gory. Actually, maybe that's why it was very well received. It handles the emotional suspense very well. It must be possible to get it somehow. Might have to purchase and order a copy for yourself in order to see it if you're interested. I've been able to buy season 1 for not too high a price, but the second season, which is called Higurashi Rei, is actually quite hard to get, and it can be really pricey, which sucks because it is the answer season to the mysteries of the first season and is more than a worthy sequel. I will say I don't really like the first episode of Higurashi Rei of season 2, but everything after the first episode is great. The first episode is just kind of it's a what happened years later after the finale of the first season, and I think, in my opinion, it can totally be skipped. It really doesn't add anything. It doesn't destroy anything. It's just kind of boring to get through. But Higurashi Rei, episodes 2 through the very end are really good. I'll script and publish videos talking about Higurashi in detail some other time. But what happens is not that different from Groundhog Day. The kids who in most need to be careful. Not in most seasons. The first and second season are separated into these little miniature character story arcs that are like, the shortest is 2 episodes that focuses on Rika. The longest is like 4 or 5 episodes. But each season is broken up into these different little cycles. Rei works a little bit differently. So in most of the little arcs, the kids start slaughtering each other due to misunderstandings gone horribly wrong, and a very complex plot about a curse in the village. They have to eventually learn how to overcome their paranoia, work together, and trust their friends in order to prevent the tragedies that end up happening every single time before. Although even when they at last do, some consequences, some deaths that had happened before, some tragedies still cannot be reversed. I would actually really love to do a whole series of video chats talking about Higurashi with each of my 4 siblings, either one-on-one or together. They've all seen the first season at least. I've seen Rei. Don't know if any of them have seen Rei. We all loved the first season, so Rei is even better. Now putting that together, talking with all of them, maybe we can do some kind of multiple Skype sometime. It's going to take a lot of arranging. Might be possible at some point, but for now, unknown. Anyway, this theme found in the Groundhog Day loops of going through events that take place over and over again until the lessons are finally learned in Groundhog Day, in Higurashi, in other stories that use a similar plot. You know, we can talk about plots like that and ask, why couldn't the character or characters figure it out before? But when you look at real life and the cycles of history, we humans actually really suck at learning from the past. And we all have these quotes: if you ignore history, you're doomed to repeat it, and yet most people end up ignoring it anyway. Now it's difficult. It does take a lot of learning on your own to truly learn, really, because school is just no help at this. Or you're getting completely revisionist history. Those are whole discussions even of in and of themselves. If you have not yet checked out Stefan Molyneux' speech that he just recently gave to the EU, you should really watch it. He uploaded the whole speech very recently. I will post a link in the post a link to the YouTube video of his presentation in my video below. He talks about lessons that the world, especially its political leaders, have not learned. In fact, the people we call national leaders are often the slowest to learn from the real world. And for years, actually most likely decades now, national leaders and politicians, with a small handful of exceptions, but not many, have been embarrassingly detached from the will of their own people. Universities become institutions pretty much solely dedicated to indoctrinating young adults into socialism and communism, even though the death count of those ideologies has resulted in the deaths, brutal, agonizing deaths that are not fun to watch, of hundreds of millions of people worldwide in the last century alone. 1 century. Yet scores of people, not just millennials. I know millennials get a lot of crap for this. Some of it earned, some of it. You have to understand, not that it excuses the delusion that they've fallen under, but you do have to understand about the millennials. They were shoved into schools by parents who divorced very soon after, given very boring, very revisionist history throughout school. They experienced the early stages of this huge offense and victim mentality culture. They didn't get the full blast of it. Most of them, that is tragically being inflicted upon children and young adults today. It's truly, if a lot of the same teachers who taught the millennials are teaching the younger generations and have accepted this without question, it's really, it's pathetic and tragic at the same time. It really does show just how malleable we are once we become afraid of being socially alienated and even fired from jobs. The censorship going on right now is truly horrifying. And there are some people trying to fight against it. Not enough yet. We're working on it. But scores of people, not just millennials, but GXers and baby boomers, are cheering for and embracing socialism all over again. After the millennials' great-grandparents were the generation that fought to repel it. Well, I mean, what happened afterwards was the socialists came and infiltrated the Western universities, and they've been building up to tearing down the free world ever since. It's a vicious cycle that we're now seeing the full blast consequences of. They planned throughout this time to work slowly up to it. Now there are a steadily growing number of people speaking out to oppose them who recognize that it's better to risk it than to not fight at all, but not nearly enough yet. Western families are still in shreds, even though it's been many decades since the immense multiplying of the divorce rates ripped the lives of tens of billions of children to shreds, and the direct, horribly negative consequences of divorce have been known for 2-3 decades at least now. The GX generation was the first generation to really get the full horrific experience of the, what I think Molyneux points out, 300% rise in the divorce rates in the 1970s, late 60s, 1970s. And so we've had 2 to 3 generations that have been traumatized by that already, and yet, if anything, family situations are getting worse. There are ways to revive the stable family of the past, but it's going to take a huge amount of effort, and with each year, each decade that passes, it gets harder and harder to do so. The generations alive today are traumatized, have been traumatized since they were very young children. Many of us feel lost and alone. And so this all goes back to people finding it very difficult to truly learn the lessons of history, even though looking back, it seems that they should have been learned by now. It is only by rebuilding, despite the fact that it will actually, not just despite, but especially because of the fact that it will take generations to revive the stability we once had. In my opinion, it's a case of, it's kind of now or never. And I don't really want to face the never. But only by doing the tough work and prolonged efforts of restabilizing families, rebuilding community support, by rejecting any more growth or help, any more growth and or help from the government. We don't need any bigger government. We don't need any more government programs. Only by rejecting those and relying more on family and community support, which will be tough to rebuild because a lot of social trust has been destroyed, but I don't know what other choice we have. And in this way, it is kind of a similar, not exact, but similar situation to what the Higurashi kids found themselves in. There's not a lot of time left to make headway in restoring our once enjoyed freedom, stability, and happiness, but if there's any fight that's worth fighting, that's it.